Okay, welcome back to part two of our talk. What is truth and can we know it? What is truth and can we know it? Can we know things beyond a sensory level? Contrary to what Hume said, we can know some things. There are ways of knowing things that are not material, like first principles of logic, which can't be measured but is known. There is a self-evident law called moral law. Moral law. Is there a universal standard? There are things that are true for everybody, which is why people around the world are committed to families or have a deep-seated obligation to help others. Why do we have an intuitive desire to help others or to do good or to shun evil? The evidence shows that we all have a non-material, non-scientific description to do good written on our hearts called moral law. Some call it natural law or conscience. Our founding fathers perceived this law, which shaped our founding documents, which is a major contributor to the greatness of our country. The Declaration of Independence reads this, written by Thomas Jefferson. The equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that not all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Please note the order of those terms. They are not unintentional. Life before liberty and the pursuit of happiness. Nature's law is self-evident, and we don't use reason to discover it. We just know it is right to help people even though we can't quantify it. Without an objective standard of morality, life would be meaningless. There would be no right and no wrong. It all would just be a matter of opinion. Moral law refutes relativism where you have your truth and I have mine. Everyone knows it is better to love than to hate, but that courage is better than cowardice. Anthropologists have studied cultures around the world, from primitive tribal groups to advanced societies. And one of those common elements is courage. It is always valued by every culture everywhere. Now, they may have different expressions of courage, may even have opposite expressions of courage, even conflicting, but the core instinct is still courage. Don't miss that. There is an absolute moral obligation that is binding on all people at all times, which is the basis of the international human rights and ethics violations. There are some things we just can't not know. We cannot not know it is wrong to kill innocent human beings for no reason. And if you can identify just one moral, just one, that is consistent worldwide, then there is moral law. Now, some will deny this, or others superimpose a set of religious beliefs to override any guilt from killing. But these all prove the existence of moral law. It doesn't mean people don't kill. But murder is wrong for all people at all times and all places. Even Hitler knew deep down it was wrong to kill. And he had to hide behind science to dehumanize the Jews to justify killing them. So it evidences that he was trying to deny moral law. But that denial evidences that it was there. So let's give some proofs that moral law exists. Number one, the self-defeating logic of relativism. Relativists say there are no moral absolutes. There are no moral values. All is a matter of taste and opinion. But this is a self-defeating statement. When they say this, they affirm what they deny. A person who denies all values respects his right to deny them, and they want people to value him as a person, right? He or she who values the right to say there are no moral absolutes is using a standard to affirm what is right. And what is that standard? Where does it come from? Funny joke. If you ever talk to an atheist who doesn't believe in right and wrong or moral law, just come up and bop him in the nose. Hit him right in the nose. If he has a desire to punch you back, where does that come from? Number two, our reactions reveal moral law. If you want a relativist to admit there are morals, then treat them unfairly, just like I mentioned. Our reactions to moral law, written on our hearts and minds, reveal that there is one. Our reactions reveal there is a moral law. To those who think stealing is wrong, steal from them. Now, if they absorb this to prove their self-righteousness, up the ante. What if someone threatens to cheat on his wife? He may not mind cheating in an episode of Desperate Housewives, but he doesn't want his wife living like a sexual relativist. He doesn't want a relatively faithful spouse. But let us say you do find a sexual relativist, and there are those in society, changing spouses. I saw a show on that one time. Up the ante further with moral law. What about murder? What if someone were to want to murder them? So our reactions help us determine right and wrong as a nation. Take 9/11. Someone may say that bin Laden thought it was right to fly airplanes into buildings. And we felt outraged at the wrongness. Who's to say who's right, bin Laden or us? But that's because bin Laden was not on the receiving end of the atrocity. What if they were his jets into his buildings? If moral law is not affirmed by others' actions, it certainly is by their reactions. Persian scholar Avicenna had an antidote to those who deny relativism. Anyone who denies these should be beaten and burned until he admits that to be beaten is not the same as not to be beaten. And to be burned is not the same as not to be burned. Great little antidote. Number three, relativists confuse practices with values. A relativist who really hasn't thought through the issue confuses an absolute with how it is manifested in the culture. For example, they may say how you greet somebody in Japan is different than how you might greet somebody in Kenya. See? Greetings are all relative. But they're missing the obvious. The greeting. Every culture group around the world has an inbuilt common value to greet. Where's that from? Number four, relativists confuse morals with disagreements. Let's take an issue like abortion. Some are pro-life, some are pro-choice, or pro-abortion, if you will, on that. And the issue can be complicated. See, each has his own side, and who's to say is correct? But the existence of a conflict to begin with indicates each side desires to be right. Where does that sense come from? No one who holds their position thinks they're wrong, even when that Why even have that desire? No one with that position thinks they are wrong. Why even have that desire to begin with? Whenever you say a position is better, you smuggle in moral law to make your assertion. When you say your position is better on life or choice, you're smuggling in that law. With two conflicting positions, there is the common value to be right. And each side sees different ways to preserve life, either the mother exclusively or the baby as well. If there's no conflict, there's no moral law. There would be no dilemma if morality is relative. Disagreement evidences the moral law, and struggle indicates its existence. If the unborn is not living, then liberty is the only guiding value. But if the baby is alive, life is also a value in the equation. And then we adjudicate by a standard that transcends the two beliefs. In this case, the Declaration of Independence that I read before affirms moral law. If that order in the Declaration is intentional, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, then life comes before liberty. You wouldn't even have a life if you wouldn't even have liberty or a choice if you didn't have life to begin with. Even science affirms that life begins at conception. A baby has its own genetic code, has its blood type, a gender, there's a heartbeat after 18 days, and brain waves after 48 days. If there's any doubt, it may be better to err on the side of life. I like what Ronald Reagan said to weed out the relativism of this exact issue. He said this: I have noticed that 100% of those who are for abortion have been born. 100% of those who are for abortion have been born. The most vile offenders of the law proclaim their righteousness, which evidences moral law. Prison is full of the self-righteous. A man appeals to some righteous justification before he exacts revenge for a transgression. Hey, I'm right. He was in the wrong. This is why I did this. Where does that come from? There's no conflict that there's no moral law. Now, you'll get some pretty sophisticated materialist objectives, people who are materialists. Most Darwinists avoid this issue because it is difficult. It's a difficult area for them to provide a meaningful answer. Secular biologist and humanist Edward O. Wilson from Harvard admits that though there is little science behind it, he rationalizes that morality evolved by natural selection. Though pure speculation, without any detailed pathways, which is what they always posit, no detailed pathways, he thinks that passing genes for thousands of generations led to moral sentiments. And so what he's saying is that morality is materially and genetically determined. Morality is based on an inherent feeling of instinct, not an objective standard of right and wrong. Rituals of religion are products of evolution and developed for the survival value of the community. That's a tenet of evolution. However, there are a host of problems with this, not the least of which goes at the heart of evolutionary theory. Natural selection is inadequate to explain new life forms, much less moral sentiments. If only materials exist, how do you have morality? How much does hate weigh? Where is the love atom? What is the chemical composition of the murder molecule? And then if I kill my neighbor, I can just say my genes made me do it. There's no moral responsibility. I can blame nature, which has resulted in another host of social problems in our legal codes. And even going back to the insanity defense has a naturalistic basis in there. Determinism. Human thoughts and moral values are not material things any more than the laws of logic or mathematics are material. And this is the trap that reductionists are forced into. Reductionists believe all things are reduced to materials, all matter, all of reality. Life itself doesn't contain the answers to the questions of its own meaning. Life does not contain the answers to the questions of its own meaning. Commenting on the mystery of the mind and how thoughts can be merely a product of chemical reactions of the brain, even atheists and neo-Darwinists, J.B.S. Haldane said this: "It seems to me immensely unlikely that my mind is a mere byproduct of matter. If my mental processes are determined wholly by the motions of the atoms in my brain, I have no reason to suppose that my beliefs are true. Now, they may be sound chemically, but that does not make them sound logically. And hence, I have no reason for supposing my brain to be composed of atoms." It's a great quote. Thought and moral values can't be explained by natural selection or any other nihilistic means. And morality cannot be instinctual because we have competing instincts. In a crisis, we have the instinct of self-preservation. But then there's another dynamic called other preservation, for others. Something often tells us to ignore the stronger one to preserve ourselves and help another in a crisis at great risk to our lives. Yet the self-survival instinct is a tenet of Darwinism. Even that book by Richard Dawkins came out in the 70s called The Selfish Gene, right? Survival. Why do people suppress their own survival instincts for others, even risking death? Why would they risk it for a lower life form, such as an animal even, which does nothing for his own survival value? If survival is the primary tenet of evolution, why do people engage in self-destructive behavior? How does that help the survival value of the community? What is good about survival without objective moral law? This is something Darwinism is severely inadequate to explain. Altruism, they can't explain it. So morals are discovered, not determined by Darwinian mechanisms. Morality exists independently of how we know it and is consistent with the scientific method, the laws of logic, and the correspondence theory of truth. Now, one researcher said this: "How does natural law, which at best channels random chance, coexist with chance? If natural law is coexistent with the evolution of life, it cannot exist independently of it. If natural law is coexistent with the evolution of life, it cannot exist independently of it. It kind of co-evolves. But then it's not transcendent. Naturalism is a major purveyor of relativism because nature is amoral. Morality is not absolute if it has a natural source. There are no morals if there are only natural causes. Hitler used evolution and attributed a will to nature, the very thing blind, undirected causes cannot have. They can't have a will. If there is no moral objective standard, then who's to say Hitler is more evil than Mother Teresa? There is no higher moral status than the slime if that is what we evolved from, and there is nothing beyond us. Therefore, we shouldn't be surprised at the Aurora Theater massacres, or the West Paducah, Kentucky, or Columbine, or Virginia Tech school shootings. The nihilism of Darwinism does influence us. Mass murderer Jeffrey Dahmer said this in prison. I reasoned that if evolution is true and that we came from the slime, then there is no God to be accountable to. And what's the point of modifying my behavior? So ideas do have consequences, and false ideas about truth lead to false ideas about life. Believing error can have deadly consequences. Philosopher Peter Singer, enmeshed in the moral blur endemic in closed system naturalism, argues that the boundary between animal and human is completely arbitrary. He said that the life of a newborn is of less value than a pig, dog, or a chimp, and can be killed up to 28 days old. That's out of the womb. If that's true, why not 28 months or 28 years? In Darwinism, truth is relative, and the theory cheapens life. Now here's the rub. Darwinists cannot disagree with these premises without appealing to a moral standard. We cannot condemn the Nazi experiments because there is no moral standard in Darwinian thinking. So we appeal to another called moral law, which the Nuremberg trials revealed, and they were prosecuted. Furthermore, rape is a natural consequence of Darwin in evolutionary thinking. We are merely the products of many rapes. Darwinism is used to remove moral law from civil law, which ends up degrading society. Yet if just one thing is wrong, there is a moral law. Going back to our argument, let's create another syllogism. We can say this: all laws have a lawgiver. All laws have a lawgiver. Moral law is a law. Therefore, moral law has a lawgiver. If there is no moral law, how do we adjudicate between whose definition of right and wrong to live by? The bully in power? Hitler liked killing. Mother Teresa liked saving. Who's right? Unless there is a moral standard beyond both of them, then one is just versus the other is just a matter of opinion. Atheists may believe in right and wrong, they just have no way to justify it. A Darwinian worldview has ruled out moral law in advance, which employs circular reasoning. Ruling out intelligent causes from the beginning, they presuppose the thing they are trying to establish as the conclusion. Biology professor Ronald Brady shows the circular reasoning when he says this: by making our explanation into the definition of the condition to be explained, we express not scientific hypothesis, but belief. We are so convinced that our explanation is true that we no longer see any need to distinguish it from the situation we are trying to explain. And that probably best explains the problem with evolution as a theory. Somebody asked a question before, why is evolution still around if it's not really based on correspondence? Well, it's because it's become a belief. I mean, you know what we said about beliefs? Beliefs don't determine the nature of truth. Beliefs can change. Truth is not, it's always there. And we conform to it. It doesn't conform to us. So, how can we know truth? And can we know it? Yes, we can know it, and we do it every day through the laws of logic, moral law, evidence, and even the scientific method. There may be situations where truth is relative. But there are some things that apply to all men at all times. 2 plus 2 equals 4 anywhere in the world. In India, just as well as in America. Just like gravity. Gravity works the same way everywhere in the world at all times. We demand truth in all areas of life. We demand it from loved ones, from spouses, from doctors on tests, from balances on our bank accounts, in court cases, from employers to pay us correctly, from airline schedules, in books, in articles, news, road signs, on food labels, everywhere. One historian wrote that the world has truth in it, or the world cannot exist. Life is built and sequenced around truth. Life only works when people, places, and events are recorded as the past happened. One philosopher said this: if the presumption of lying is universalized, where one always assumes someone is lying, lying becomes pointless without the general presumption of truth-telling. We all operate by truth. But for some reason, when it comes to truth about morality or other religions, we don't demand it in the worldviews all of a sudden. Why? Oh, don't talk about that. That's just religion. Let him have it. Really? Ideas have consequences. That's the utmost of truth. We will gladly accept self-defeating and illogical truth claims from politically correct individuals that say truth doesn't exist. All is relative. You have your truth, I have mine. You shouldn't distinguish, don't contradict. One human family coexists, right? So on. But such relativism contributes to our cultural schizophrenia. As Augustine said centuries ago, we love the truth when it enlightens us, but we hate it when it convicts us. If we kill the concept of truth, we kill the concept of morality. And if we kill morality, we have social degeneration, which is what we get, which is when things get really true for me and for you. Social degeneration. There is a correlation between morals and morale. Now, we will hear religious pluralists say, don't question someone's belief system. But when you say that, aren't you imposing your belief system to not question? Is it immoral to question beliefs? And is your statement just a matter of opinion? Self-defeating. If you're a pluralist, shouldn't you by definition respect the belief to question another belief? Advocates of the new tolerance are not really tolerant at all. When they say you ought not question another belief, it's a false prohibition against making judgments, since that in itself is a judgment. But by seeking reasonable proof, we can know something even about God by the same scientific method we use in all other fields. Utilizing the correspondence theory and the laws of logic, by induction, we start with the effects and we draw conclusions about the cause. As something cannot be a cause and an effect of that cause at the same time, what we see in nature is exactly what we would expect to see if God exists and yet still maintains his transcendence. Creation has the exact blend of the evidence for design while retaining the mystery. And since moral law exists, it is willful blindness to truth. So with this two-part discussion, I hope we have answered the question, what is truth and can we know it? In fact, we already know truth. We might never realize it. Thank you. let me just take a few questions. If anybody has any questions, wrap this up. I know it's been a long day, so yeah. Okay, yeah.
You said a while ago that the relativistic belief doesn't determine truth. So why does the government allow moral or relativistic errors, beliefs which could be detrimental to society,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
pertaining to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness?
Well, that's another complicated question. Why does the government allow it in policies if they're harmful and relativistic? Well, it all depends on who is elected to power. Usually, what happens, the process is somebody gets elected and they carry within their own worldview. Primarily, policy is determined from the top down, and they codify something into law in accord with their worldview. And it may be illogical, but that's what they like. A lot, oftentimes, it's a special interest group that they whose cause they've taken upon themselves, and then they want to extrapolate that onto all of society by codifying it into law. And very often, the problem is the harmful effects of something that is against moral law is not often seen right away. Man tends to reverse right and wrong innately anyway. You can read that in Isaiah chapter 5. What is true is what is untrue is called true. What is good is called evil. And they often celebrate something like that. The problem is the effects are not seen right away. And social degeneration takes on a subtlety. It's like the proverbial frog in the kettle. You turn on the heat ever so slightly, and you don't know the effects. But that's why I believe you have to go beyond your time and space, your time and study history. Because a lot of these social experiments we're doing today have been done before in history with less than stellar results. Moral indulgence causes social chaos. It's a clear pattern. We can detect that back in Babylon, go back to the Assyrians, you can go back to Greece, certainly back to Rome, moral decay. And if you're just a product of your own times and you don't really get outside your time and place and study history, you'll tend to make the same errors. There are patterns of civilizations. There are patterns. And so I believe that when civil law reflects moral law, the nation tends to be healthier. But again, it depends on your worldview. We're living in a culture that's increasingly hostile towards the idea of God, even the God of our founding fathers, which contributed to the greatness of our country. So that's a risk. That will result in social experiments. Most likely, we will decline. You can't go higher than when you're at the top. We are the greatest nation in the history of the world. If you want to maintain that distinction, you better dance with who brung you. And our founding fathers, like it or not, I don't care if it's a relativistic age or not, they were theists. Not necessarily the most evangelical as we would think of them. But most of those men did read the Bible and they intentioned those biblical principles into Scripture. I mean, even I can give you some quotes from Thomas Jefferson, who talked about the consequences of of forsaking the God of the Bible. Those are actual quotes. So, I mean, why? There's a lot of reasons, but they get myopic and they get inward and they start thinking that they can't be wrong. But I would say, hey, start thinking about what you're thinking about. What is your worldview? What is your lens? Is it tenable? You know, um, a lot of American ideals now are heavily influenced by foreign influence. We're entertaining the idea of socialism now as a social construct. Amazing, a candidate would even overtly say that. 20 years ago, it would be impossible. We're entertaining, New Age has been here for quite a while. Now we're even entertaining Sharia law in some locales. So, you know, we've talked about how to adjudicate between these worldviews. So, um, so maybe that answers your question somehow. Thanks. Any other question? Okay. No question. Thanks. Well, folks, thanks a lot, and we'll see you again next time. Thank you.